The nanny slept on the floor with the baby. The millionaire saw it and fell in love with her. The rain poured relentlessly over Detroit, each icy drop slamming against the cracked window pane of a basement apartment. In the dim, suffocating light, Hannah Sullivan, 30 years old, sat curled on a rickety wooden chair, clutching an eviction notice in trembling hands. She read it for the 10th time, as if the words might magically change. Vacate within 15 days, 3 months overdue. Her fingers shook, not from the cold, but from the quiet, creeping terror swallowing her whole. Her light brown hair clung damp to her cheeks, still wet from the walk home. Her gray eyes were heavy with sleepless nights. Just a week ago, she'd been fired from her waitress job at a local diner, her 3rd job in 6 months. The manager didn't even look her in the eye when he dismissed her. "You're too slow. We need quick thinkers here." The words pierced her already bruised heart. Hannah had heard it her whole life, not good enough. Orphaned at 8, she'd bounced from one foster home to another. And in every home, one lesson was drilled into her. Be grateful. Don't expect too much. But gratitude couldn't fill the aching hollowness. It couldn't replace the feeling of belonging somewhere, of being loved without conditions. And now, sitting in that damp apartment, no lights, no money, no one, Hannah couldn't help but think, maybe they were right. Maybe I really don't deserve better. The dim glow of a street lamp spilled through the fogged-up window, making the room feel even colder, even lonelier. Hannah clutched the eviction notice in her hands, but her mind had already slipped away, backward, into the shadows of a childhood she rarely let herself revisit. She had no real memories of her birth parents. They died in a car crash when she was 8. One night she went to bed in her warm room, and the next morning she woke up in a cold iron cot at an orphanage on the outskirts of Detroit. No one visited. No one said her name with affection. The orphanage wasn't cruel, but it wasn't kind either. The caretakers were overworked. The resources always stretched thin. Hannah learned to do everything quietly, fold her own clothes, share the rare pieces of candy, and hold back tears when the lights went out. Every year she hoped someone would choose her. That rarely happened. At 11, she was taken in by the Carlson family, a clean-cut household with twin boys and a house that smelled like lemon cleaner. It seemed promising until Mrs. Carlson said, "Hannah, you'll help with the chores. It's how we teach gratitude." That's when little Hannah understood. She wasn't a daughter. She was free help. After the Carlsons came 3 other families. Each had promises. Each eventually said, "She just doesn't quite fit with us." 2. Hannah stopped hoping. She learned to live in hallways that didn't belong to her, with eyes trained to read adult moods and a heart always bracing for the next goodbye. She never had anyone call her sweetheart without it fading by month 3. She never got to keep anything for long. Every toy, every dress, every glimpse of safety could vanish overnight. Now, at 30, that same ache, the one from being left behind, still lived inside her. Not loud, but steady, like a wound that had never fully closed. And tonight, it throbbed as if it had never healed at all. The sudden ring of her phone sliced through the silence and her spiral of despair. It was Monica, her only true friend, warm, spirited Puerto Rican, working as a live-in housekeeper for a wealthy family in Telluride, Colorado. "Hon, I've got news," Monica chirped, always full of energy. "The guy next door needs someone to housekeep and watch his baby. Good pay, room and board included. You just need to know how to clean and not panic when babies cry. I think it's a great shot for you." Hannah frowned. "I've never done housekeeping, Mon. When I was younger, I dreamed of being a fashion designer. I don't even know if I can do this." "You've done every hard job life threw at you, girl. You're better at keeping a place clean than anyone I know. And the baby? She's 9 months. The dad's a single guy. A bit cold, but not a bad man." Hannah sat silently on the edge of her bed for nearly an hour after the call. The room was so quiet she could hear the ticking of the wall clock, each second falling like a gentle hammer, pounding the urgency of her situation. Outside, the rain hadn't let up. Monica's offer wasn't the dream Hannah had once held close. She had never imagined herself becoming a housekeeper for some single father in Colorado. But life didn't follow the plots of storybooks. In real life, her fridge held nothing but a nearly expired carton of milk, and her purse had a hole in the bottom. She looked around the room. Peeling paint, floorboards that dipped underfoot, a table lamp propped up by old paperbacks. She had once called this place home, but it had never truly felt like one. Her eyes landed on a wooden box beneath the bed. She leaned down, pulled it out. Inside, scissors, thread, a worn pincushion, a few fabric scraps, the sewing kit she'd kept since she was 15. At the orphanage, she used to mend clothes for the younger kids. In foster homes, she'd secretly patched bags and fixed hems, small acts that made her feel useful. There was a time Hannah dreamed of more, a small studio of her own, where she'd design dresses for women who, like her, had once felt unseen. But real life had pushed that dream down, folded it away like a scrap of unused cloth. Finally, she sighed. "Send me the address. I'll give it a shot." She wheeled the suitcase to the door. Before switching off the light one last time, Hannah turned to look at the empty room. No regret, just a quiet tightening in her chest. She didn't know what lay ahead, only that she couldn't stay here. And maybe, just maybe, small steps were enough to open up whole new paths. The final bus curved along a snowy road lined with towering pine trees. The sky was a dull gray, and Hannah Sullivan shivered as she looked out the window. Telluride felt like a world apart, quiet, pristine, and distant. When the bus stopped at a tall iron gate, she stepped down and wheeled her suitcase slowly along a stone path that led to the mansion. The building that rose before her made her pause. Gray slate roof, aged stone walls, tall windows draped with deep burgundy curtains. It looked more like a winter painting than a real home. The heavy wooden door creaked open. A woman in her early 50s, hair neatly pinned, posture upright, greeted her. "You must be Hannah," she said, her voice firm but not cold. "I'm Mrs. Langford, the housekeeper here. Mr. Whitmore is busy with the baby. I'll show you to your room first." The interior of the mansion was even grander than she imagined. High ceilings, polished wood floors, abstract art, and bookshelves that touched the ceiling. Yet, despite its perfection, the house felt empty, like every sound was swallowed by the thick, untouched silence. Mrs. Langford led her to a small upstairs room with a window overlooking the pines. It was tidy, clean, and cold. "Your off hours are after 8 p.m. You may use the side kitchen and laundry room. Baby Sophie has a daytime nanny, but occasionally will need an extra hand when Mr. Whitmore or I are busy." Hannah nodded. "And Mr. Whitmore?" "Caleb Whitmore, 37, founder and CEO of a sustainable tech company. Very successful, but private." Mrs. Langford hesitated. "He dislikes noise, and no one enters the library or his study without permission." Before Hannah could ask more, soft footsteps echoed in the hallway, along with the faint babble of a child. She turned and, for the first time, saw the man she would be working for. Caleb Whitmore appeared at the top of the staircase, carrying a tiny girl in a white knit sweater. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dark-haired, neatly groomed. His gray-blue eyes gave nothing away. "You're the new one?" he asked, voice low and clipped. "Yes, I'm Hannah." Caleb gave a small nod. "Mrs. Langford told you what's expected. I ask only for efficiency and silence." With that, he turned and walked away. Hannah watched his tall frame disappear down the hall, Sophie tucked against his chest. The baby blinked at her curiously, one tiny hand clinging to her father's shirt. and then they vanished behind a door. Hannah stood still, feeling as though she had just stepped into a house without laughter, without warmth, only the wind against the glass and footsteps that never lingered. The mansion was unusually quiet that night. Wind howled through the pine trees outside the window, slipping through tiny cracks in the old wooden frames. Hannah had just folded a blanket in the living room when Mrs. Langford entered, her face slightly troubled. "The nanny's come down with a fever. She called off last minute. I have to take my sister to the hospital. Could you look after Sophie tonight?" Hannah paused briefly, then nodded. "Of course." "Mr. Whitmore just left for the airport. He won't be back until late." An hour later, Sophie began to cry. It started as soft whimpers, but quickly escalated into sharp, aching sobs. Hannah tried everything: fresh diaper, warm bottle, even showing her the snow outside the window. Nothing worked. Finally, she picked the baby up and sat in the armchair by the fireplace, gently rocking her. "There, sweetheart. It's okay," she murmured. "I know this feeling. I used to cry like this, too. Alone, no one came." Her voice was low, warm, tinged with something that wasn't cold, but memory. Slowly, Sophie calmed. Hannah began to hum a lullaby, one she remembered from the orphanage. She didn't know the words, just the rhythm. Soft and safe. Sophie's eyes grew heavy. Her breathing slowed. Afraid to move and wake her, Hannah held her closer. After a while, she shifted, laying Sophie gently on her chest. She pulled a light blanket over them both, and in that fragile warmth, Hannah, too, drifted into sleep. When Caleb returned around 11 p.m., snow still clung to his coat. He kicked off his shoes and moved quietly through the living room, his usual routine to check things before heading upstairs. Then he stopped. Right in front of him, on the Persian rug by the fireplace, Hannah was asleep on the floor, cradling his daughter in her arms. In the soft light, her brown hair fell loosely around her shoulders. Sophie lay peaceful, face pressed against Hannah's chest, one tiny hand curled into her shirt, as if she never wanted to let go. Caleb didn't move. He stood frozen, not from shock, but from something far older, a longing he had buried long ago. It wasn't just tenderness or warmth. It was the ache of knowing this was what home could have felt like and realizing how long he had gone without it. He was used to quiet nights, the kind filled only with his own footsteps echoing through the halls. But the scene before him shattered something inside. Hannah wasn't just watching Sophie, she was holding her like she held a part of herself. There was no hesitation, no formality, just an embrace full of patience, tenderness, and something achingly genuine. Caleb couldn't remember the last time anyone had held his daughter like that. Not out of duty, not because they were paid to, but because they truly cared. His throat tightened. The sudden rush of feeling caught him off guard, a softness he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. In that moment, there were no deadlines, no meetings, no roles. Just the image of a woman, no blood relation, holding his child with all the quiet love of a mother. He stood there for a long time. He said nothing. He didn't wake them. Instead, he turned off the lamp, fetched an extra blanket, and gently laid it over them both. Since that night, no one mentioned the evening Hannah had fallen asleep with Sophie by the fire. But something had shifted. Not overtly, not aloud, just quietly, silently. Caleb started watching her more. At breakfast, when she quietly poured Mrs. Langford's coffee. When she sat in the kitchen mending an old coat. When she whispered to Sophie while changing her diaper. He didn't speak, but his gaze lingered longer than before. One rainy afternoon, Hannah was dusting the shelves in the library, the very room Mrs. Langford had once told her was off-limits unless invited. But today, the door was open, and Caleb was inside, standing before the shelves, a leather-bound book in hand. "Do you like reading?" he asked, his voice low without looking at her. Hannah startled slightly. Yes, I do. Mostly old books, ones people left behind at the orphanage. What kind of books? She hesitated, then smiled softly. Romance novels. Caleb raised an eyebrow, as if the answer surprised him. Why? Hannah smoothed the edge of the cloth in her hand, her eyes resting on the rows of neatly arranged spines. Because in them, the broken ones, the forgotten ones, they're usually the ones who end up loved the most. No one starts with everything, but they end with what everyone wants, to be seen, to be chosen, and to be loved for exactly who they are. Caleb didn't reply. He just looked at her, and for a moment, the silent room seemed to warm, just a little. That night, when Hannah returned to her room, she found a small book placed neatly on her pillow. Persuasion by Jane Austen. No note. But she knew exactly who had left it. After receiving Persuasion, Hannah began to feel something, small but real, growing quietly inside her. It wasn't quite love, not yet, and not exactly hope. It was something simpler, the feeling of being seen. Caleb didn't suddenly become open. He remained the quiet man who lived in spreadsheets, prototypes, and Zoom meetings. But now and then, he asked if Sophie had napped well. He paused a little longer when passing the kitchen, where Hannah sat sewing Mrs. Langford's sleeve. And sometimes their eyes met, not for long, but long enough for something unnamed to pass between them. Then one morning, as the snow began to melt outside, Caleb asked Hannah to come to his study. On the desk were papers and a laptop screen glowing softly. "I need your input on a new project," he said. And that was when another door began to open, not just to work, but to something she'd never thought she deserved. Caleb stood by his desk, one hand resting lightly on a neatly stapled stack of documents. Hannah stepped in hesitantly, feeling oddly like she had the first day she arrived, a guest in someone else's world. But this room was different from the rest of the house. It didn't feel cold or distant, the soft light through the window, the scent of pine wood. It felt alive. "I'm working on an app for single mothers," Caleb began, eyes on the screen. "A platform for resources, legal aid, peer support, a space for real help." Hannah raised her eyebrows slightly. This wasn't the kind of project she expected from a man like him. "I want it to be real," Caleb continued, turning to face her. "Not from an engineer's or CEO's perspective. I need someone who knows what it feels like to be left behind, someone who understands what's missing in the real world." Hannah's heart slowed. No one had ever asked her for input on anything important. Her whole life had been about doing the task, not about being asked what she thought. And suddenly, a room full of people who didn't know her were waiting to hear her voice. It felt terrifying and beautiful. I'm not sure I'm qualified," she said quietly. "I don't have a degree. I've never worked in tech." Caleb listened. "But you have experience," he said. "You know what it's like not to be heard. I want this app to be a place where people feel like they're not alone." Hannah looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded. In the days that followed, Caleb invited her to join informal virtual meetings with the remote development team. At first, she just listened quietly, scribbling notes. But slowly she began to speak, tentatively, then clearly, then confidently. When the engineers debated UI layouts, she chimed in. "Maybe make it simpler. The moms we're targeting, they'll be checking this on old phones, holding a baby, reading between diaper changes." For the first time in her life, people paused to listen to her. No one dismissed her. Instead, they took notes, thanked her, and adjusted the plan. Another time, when discussing group chat features, Hannah suggested, "There should be an anonymous mode. Some people won't speak up if they think they'll be judged." Caleb didn't just listen. He started assigning her specific roles: user surveys, audience insights, content drafts. Then one evening, after a long virtual session, Caleb walked into the kitchen where Hannah was rinsing glasses. "You did well today," he said, his voice softer than usual. Hannah smiled, not turning around. "I didn't think I'd like anything tech-related, but I like feeling useful." There was a pause before Caleb added, almost gently, "I didn't think I'd trust anyone again, but I trust you now." They looked at each other for a moment. No declarations, no touch, just a quiet acknowledgement that between them something had begun, born not of sudden passion, but of steady presence, of trust. The first snow of the season arrived earlier than expected. Hannah was folding towels in the laundry room when she heard a car pull into the driveway, different from the familiar hum of Caleb's SUV or Mrs. Langford's sedan. Through the frosted window, she saw a sleek black SUV stop in front of the house. The door opened and a woman stepped out. Tall, blonde curls, caramel leather coat, her every step carried a kind of practiced belonging. Hannah's heart thudded, though she didn't know why. 10 minutes later, carrying fresh laundry upstairs, she heard Caleb's voice, calm but low, intertwined with a woman's voice, soft and laced with memory. Hannah paused in the hallway, instinctively turning toward the study. The door was slightly ajar. Through the narrow gap, she saw Caleb standing across from the woman, and Sophie, his daughter, was peacefully asleep in the woman's arms. "I don't want to cause trouble," the woman said gently, stroking Sophie's cheek. "I just missed her, and I missed you." Caleb didn't answer right away. His silence stretched longer than usual, and inside Hannah, something quietly fractured. She didn't stay to hear more. Hannah turned, walked quickly to her room. Her hands shook as she set down the laundry basket, as if chilled suddenly, though the house was warm. But the cold came from within. She realized something then. She was just an outsider. Even if Caleb had once trusted her, even if his gaze had lingered, the past wasn't something she could compete with. The woman, Rachel Monroe, didn't have to try. She had history. She had a child with him. She had a place. And Hannah? She came from nowhere, no degree, no family, no resume that made people stop and pay attention. All she had was her heart, and now that heart was stepping back. That night, Hannah wrote a small note and left it on the kitchen counter. Nothing dramatic, just a few quiet lines. "Thank you for letting me feel like I mattered, even if just for a moment. Sophie is an angel. I wish you both the very best." She didn't wait for morning. Didn't wait for Caleb to return from whatever conversation was still unfolding. She simply closed the door behind her, pulled her suitcase through the blanket of snow, and left behind everything she once hoped could be a beginning. And so Hannah left again, not in a rush and no longer running. This time she walked away, knowing what she had lost, but also knowing what she was worthy of. She took a bus heading west and ended up in Portland, Oregon, a city she'd once read about in an old romance novel. A place of weekend art fairs, year-round warm coffee, and odd souls living fully as themselves. Hannah rented a small room in East Portland. Barely 200 square feet, low ceiling, tiny kitchenette, but the window opened to a canopy of green. She placed her sewing kit by the window, where morning light kissed the fabric. That first week, she barely left the room. She sewed, not for orders, but to remind herself that her hands still worked and her heart still beat. One afternoon, she wandered past a weekend craft fair at Alberta Square. Small canvas tents lined the walk, vendors chatting with customers like old friends. She stood for a long while in front of an embroidery stall, eyes lingering on tablecloths that bore the trace of time and touch. That evening, Hannah sent in an email to register for a small stall. She named it Thread and Grace. 3 weeks later, she set up her old wooden table, laid out her hand-sewn cloth, hung a few tote bags, handkerchiefs, and small clutch samples. People stopped, smiled, asked for prices. An elderly woman bought 2 handkerchiefs and said, "You stitch like someone from another time." That was her first sale. Then someone came back requesting a custom-sized bag. Someone else brought in an old coat, asking for adjustments. Slowly, Hannah got busier. Not wealthy, but enough. And more importantly, every time she held needle and thread, she felt in touch with a part of herself that was entirely real. A few months in, Hannah began therapy. She said nothing the first 2 sessions, but on the third, when asked, "When was the last time you felt left behind?" she wept. From then on, once a week, she unraveled knots in her memory. Foster homes, the disappointed gaze of a former manager, the stone-cold mansion where she thought she'd found a place to belong. She started keeping a journal. Nightly, she wrote down the little things that reminded her she was still here. A smiling customer, a scrap of fabric repurposed, a morning that didn't begin with heaviness in her chest. She still thought of Sophie. She still remembered Caleb's eyes. But now they were no longer wounds. They were chapters, gentle reminders of how to let go when you no longer belong. The day she received her 50th order, a custom-embroidered bag for a single mom, she stood still at her sewing table. She didn't cry. She didn't laugh. She just placed a hand over her heart and whispered, "Thank you." She was no longer where she'd once been. But this time, she knew. She was walking toward herself. Time moved gently in Portland, as if the city itself understood that broken hearts needed a slower rhythm to heal. Hannah had stopped counting the days since she left the Telluride estate. She wasn't trying to forget anymore, nor did it hurt. The memories no longer pulled her under. They ran like a quiet stream through her, a reminder of how far she'd come. Each week, Thread and Grace welcomed another order, another curious visitor, another honest conversation. And with every needle threaded, every stitch pulled tight, she felt herself slowly mending the parts of her that once felt discarded. She thought this might be enough. A quiet life, a steady rhythm, unseen by the world, but whole within herself. Until one late autumn afternoon, when the sun stretched thin like silk across the craft fair tents, and a familiar voice, low and careful, spoke from behind her. "Hannah?" Hannah turned. She said nothing, didn't smile. But her eyes, gentle, surprised, and faintly guarded, held Caleb still, as if the entire world had paused for one fragile breath. Since Hannah had left, the Telluride estate was no longer a home. It was just a shell, a cold, hollow space of stone and silence. Caleb didn't realize it at first. He still went through the motions, emails, coffee, Zoom calls. But day by day, something chipped away at that illusion of stability. The handkerchief Hannah once embroidered for Sophie now lay folded in a drawer. But Sophie didn't smile when wrapped in it. She cried more. No fever, no teething, just sleepless wailing at night, as if searching for a comfort only she remembered. Caleb tried everything, cradled her, hummed lullabies Hannah once sang. But nothing worked. Not really. At first he was angry, at Hannah for leaving without a word, at himself for letting her go. But anger dissolved into silence, the kind he used to live with before Hannah. Only this time it didn't feel peaceful. It felt empty. He began to replay the days they shared, not as a checklist, but as a man seeing his life clearly, perhaps for the first time. He remembered how Hannah held Sophie, how she smiled quietly when fixing a collar, how their silences had been warm, not awkward. And he realized what he had lost was not just a reliable helper or a thoughtful collaborator. He had lost the only person who ever truly saw him, without needing him to prove a thing. Caleb didn't go to work for several days. He canceled meetings, ignored calls, just sat by Sophie and wondered, how can I teach her about love when I let it slip away? One morning, after Sophie finally fell asleep on his shoulder, he walked into his study, opened every investor agreement, every clause that boxed him in, and began to undo it all. He emailed the board, negotiated buybacks for every restricted share, declined every offer that required compromise. At the final meeting, he said, "This app was built for people like Hannah. If we can't understand them, we don't deserve them. And I refuse to lead anything that forgets who it's for." He signed, paid dearly. But for the first time in years, Caleb felt free, not on paper, but in his chest. A month later, he came to Portland. No address, just a few vague lines from an old email Hannah had sent. And one hope, fragile but painfully real. The city met him with autumn leaves and crisp wind, like a quiet reminder that beginnings often start with an ending. He wandered through weekend craft fairs, scanning every stall, asking strangers. Most shook their heads, until a young girl at a sketchbook stand smiled and said, "You're close. She's at the end, right by the coffee stand with the waffles." And then he saw her, Hannah, in a soft cream sweater, head bowed, stitching carefully into a cloth bag. She had no idea someone was standing a few feet away, carrying a heart that had been shattered, and now was learning how to piece itself back together. Caleb didn't come to apologize. He knew now, some wounds don't need words, they need presence. He only wanted to say, "I found you, and this time, I'm not letting go." Hannah didn't speak right away. She set the half-finished bag aside, stood up, and faced Caleb, not avoiding him, not fragile, but no longer the woman who once tried so hard to disappear. "Why now?" she asked, her voice calm, not cold. Caleb swallowed hard. His eyes didn't shy away, only full of exhaustion and truth. "Because I lost you, and only then did I realize I never truly had anything without you." Hannah was silent. That sentence touched something inside her, something she thought had long gone quiet. "Rachel came back," he continued. "She thought we could fix things, but I knew. What I need isn't the past. It's the present. It's you. I can't come back just to be broken again, Caleb." He nodded, stepping closer. "I didn't come to ask you to return to what was. I came to ask if we can start over, a new way, with you as my partner, the mother of my child, and the woman I will never take for granted again." Hannah didn't say yes that day. She asked for time, not to run, but to be sure that this choice came from peace, not impulse. They began again, like strangers who once knew each other deeply. They went to weekend markets, planned the new version of the app, read stories to Sophie, who no longer cried at night, and now laughed when her parents sat beside her together. 3 months later, on a spring morning, Caleb walked to Hannah's booth at the fair, knelt in front of her, not with diamonds, not with roses, but with a fabric ring embroidered by hand. It read, "I choose you." And in that moment, Hannah knew, this time no one was walking away. The entire market cheered, some cried, some took photos, some hugged Hannah like this was everyone's victory, every forgotten heart's redemption. They married right there at the fair, simple, warm, no elaborate decor. Just friends, neighbors, soft music, and real smiles. 6 months later, they lived in a small house in Portland, filled with sunlight, plants, and fabric sketches pinned to the walls. Hannah was pregnant with their second child. Caleb still ran the app, now serving 10 countries, helping millions of single mothers find community, support, and hope. And Hannah? She was no longer the girl who sat silently in corners. Thread and grace had become a symbol of craftsmanship, resilience, and quiet beauty. She spoke at design conferences, shipped orders across the country. Yet every morning she still sewed by the window, hands steady, heart full. One morning at breakfast, Sophie, now 3, asked, "Mommy, why do you smile when no one's talking?" Hannah looked at Caleb, then at her belly. Then she said gently, "Because I remember having nothing, and now I have everything." And so, in a world that once made her believe she was just passing through others' lives, Hannah finally found a place to stay. Not because someone needed her, but because she finally knew she deserved to belong.